The Humvee. The Army built it to carry things, radios, water, men, not to survive a war. The safer truck already existed. The Pentagon knew. It reached for the Humvee anyway. Kuwait, 2004. A convoy idles at the gate, waiting to roll north into Iraq. The trucks are aluminum. The doors are canvas. The floor is thin metal with nothing under it to stop a blast. The men fix it themselves. They dig through Kuwaiti landfills for steel and bulletproof glass already shot up and weld the best of it onto their trucks by hand. They line the floors with sandbags, so the only thing between a soldier's legs and a buried bomb is a bag of dirt he filled himself. They called it hillbilly armor. They were not joking. They were surviving. The answer was already out there. Not new, not secret. A mine-resistant design had saved lives in southern Africa for 30 years. A written request to buy it, 1,169 of them, sat in an inbox, unanswered. The truck was never the whole story. It runs across 2 wars, a factory idling, waiting on an order, an enemy that kept changing the bomb. One man inside the Marine Corps who saw the fix buried said so and paid for it. To see how a truck got men killed while the fix sat on a shelf, you have to rewind 20 years, to a vehicle that was never meant to see a war at all. The Humvee was built to replace the Jeep. 1979. The Army writes a requirement for one vehicle to do the work of a dozen: haul cargo, carry troops, mount a radio, tow a gun. A company called AM General wins the production contract a few years later. The first trucks roll off the line in 1985. On the requirement sheet, it is a triumph. Fast, roomy. It fords deep water and climbs a 60% grade. It goes anywhere. Look at what it is made of. The body is aluminum, light metal, because light is the whole point. Light means fast and cheap to fly anywhere on Earth. The bottom is flat. It rides low to the ground. Nobody who signed that shape was thinking about a bomb underneath it. They were thinking about cargo. The Army even had a name for the category: light tactical vehicle. Not a fighting vehicle, a truck. The Pentagon's own investigators later said it in plain words. The unarmored Humvee was vulnerable to mines because of its flat bottom, its low weight, its low clearance, and its aluminum body. Every feature that made it good at hauling made it lethal to sit in when the ground went off. That is the original sin of this whole story. The truck did exactly what it was designed to do. It was never designed for the war it got sent to. The first warning came in a city, 11 years early, October 1993, Mogadishu. American Rangers and Delta operators drive into the middle of a hostile city in thin-skinned Humvees to snatch a warlord's men. An hour-long raid becomes a night under fire. 2 Blackhawks go down. The convoys sent to reach them get shot apart in the streets. The Humvees had no armor. Rounds passed through the doors. In narrow streets, with fighters on every rooftop, a soft truck was a coffin with wheels. One documentary on that fight asked the question the plainest way anyone has: who drives into a city fight in an unarmored truck? A decade later, the answer would be the same Army again. Here is the part that rhymes with everything after it. Before the fight, the commander on the ground asked for armor, not truck kits, tanks, Bradley fighting vehicles, real steel to survive a city. Washington said no. The Secretary of Defense, Les Aspin, turned it down. When 18 Americans came home dead, that no ended his career. He was gone within months. The lesson was paid for in blood and filed away. Unarmored vehicles die in cities. Everyone in the building knew it in 1993. 10 years later, the Army drove into the cities of Iraq in the same soft trucks. The bombs did not look like much: a length of pipe, an artillery shell, a garage door opener wired to a battery, buried in the trash on the shoulder of a road. 2003. The invasion ends in 3 weeks. Then the other war starts, the one nobody planned for. The improvised explosive device becomes the thing that kills Americans in Iraq. Not tanks, not jets. A shell in a pothole, set off by a man with a phone 100 yards away. The trucks on those roads were the same aluminum boxes built to haul cargo in peacetime. The men inside them stopped waiting for the army to fix it and started fixing it themselves. You know what that looked like. Welded scrap, cut glass, a bag of sand for a floor. On December 8, 2004, one of those men said it out loud. Camp Buehring, Kuwait. A town hall meeting. Donald Rumsfeld, Secretary of Defense, has come to talk to troops staging to cross into Iraq. He opens the floor to questions. A National Guardsman named Thomas Wilson stands up and asks why his men are picking through scrap heaps and landfills for metal to armor their trucks before they roll north. The hall erupts. The cheering is so loud that Rumsfeld has to ask him to say it again. The cheering hides a detail. A reporter helped write that question. Embedded journalists were barred from questioning the secretary directly. Only troops could. A reporter from a Tennessee paper found a soldier with the same complaint and helped him with the wording, telling him, by his family's account, to tone it down a little. The most famous accountability moment of the war happened because the press smuggled its question in through a grunt. Then Rumsfeld answered. His reply became one of the most quoted lines of the entire war. "You go to war with the army you have," he said, "not the army you might want or wish to have at a later time." He was not done. "You can put all the armor in the world on a tank," he went on, "and a tank can still be blown up. You can up-armor a Humvee, and it can be blown up too." Every word of that was technically true. It was also the coldest thing a man in his chair could have said to a room of people about to go drive those trucks. The name the soldiers had given their own scrap plating went national that week: hillbilly armor. ABC News ran a segment under those exact words. Newsweek ran it too. For a few days, the whole country watched the richest military on earth send its people into a war in trucks they had to armor out of a landfill. In the room, it landed like a door swinging shut. In the briefing slides, it is even defensible. You cannot conjure armor out of thin air. Production takes time. A tank can be blown up too. In the field, it told a man welding a scrap plate onto his own door that the waiting was the plan. Here is what almost no one in that tent knew. The waiting was not physics. It was a decision. The paper that proved it was already sitting in an office a few hundred miles away. That paper would sit in that office for a long time. The man who finally pulled it back out was not a general, and not the reporter in the tent. He was a civilian scientist inside the Marine Corps named Franz Gayl, and he had not entered this story yet. Keep his name. While the cameras filmed a soldier and a secretary, the fight that actually mattered was a document nobody was watching. The Army did have a real fix for the Humvee. It simply could not seem to build it fast enough. The M1114, a factory up-armored Humvee, steel and thick ballistic glass designed in from the start. It worked. Heavier, slower, thirstier than a stripped truck, but it could eat a blast that would have gutted a soft skin. One company made that armor, O'Gara, Hess, and Eisenhart in Ohio. In the winter of 2004, while soldiers in Iraq cut up scrap by hand, that plant was running under capacity. The company said so out loud. It could raise output by more than a fifth immediately with no new machinery. It was, in its own words, waiting on an order. The armor soldiers were dying without sat inside a factory idling because the paperwork to buy more had not caught up to the war. Congress eventually forced more than $1 billion into armored trucks and bolt-on kits, and the line sped up. 30 trucks a month became hundreds. On the spec sheet, the problem was solving itself. The Army was up-armoring the Humvee about as fast as a factory could be pushed to run. On the roads, none of it mattered. The enemy had already changed the game. The enemy watched the armor go on and adapted. Early on, a roadside bomb was crude, a shell in the dirt wired to a trigger set off by a man crouched behind a wall with a garage door opener. The up-armored Humvee, when it finally arrived, beat most of those. The steel soldiers had begged for started doing its job against the first generation of bombs. The bomb makers went to school. They buried the charges deeper. They chained them together so a single trigger walked a line of blasts down a whole convoy. They hid the triggers in the trash, in dead animals, in the dirt itself. Every fix the Americans fielded, the enemy studied and beat. Then came the weapon that made all of it pointless, the explosively formed penetrator. Say it once and forget it. What it does is the part that matters. Take a steel tube. Cap one end with a shallow, machined dish of copper. Pack the rest with explosive and bury it by the road facing out. When it fires, the blast turns that copper dish inside out and forges it in a fraction of a second into a single slug, moving faster than any rifle bullet. It does not batter armor. It punches a hole straight through the plate and sends a storm of metal fragments through whatever is behind it, through the door of an up-armored Humvee, through the crew inside it. These were not junkyard bombs. The best of them were precise, machined, and, according to the United States government, supplied through Iran, smuggled across the border by a network tied to the Quds Force, and handed to men who were taught exactly how to place them. They were patient, too. A good one could be aimed at the third truck in a convoy, or at the driver's seat in particular, and set off by a passive infrared beam that no radio jammer could stop. The Americans brought in better jammers. The bomb makers moved to triggers a jammer could not touch. Every countermeasure bought a few months, and then it was beaten. Pretty what that the Army had spent 2 years and billions of dollars racing to bolt steel onto the Humvee. Congress had forced the money through. The factory had finally caught up. The steel was finally arriving, and the enemy had already built the thing that went through it like paper. Declassified Pentagon records would later tie these penetrators alone to 196 American deaths in Iraq. The up-armored Humvee was never going to be enough. The problem was never the thickness of the door. The problem was the shape of the truck, the flat floor that caught a blast and drove it up into the men instead of away from them. To beat a bomb like that, you did not need a stronger Humvee. You needed a different truck. A truck built around the blast instead of on top of it. That truck already existed. It had existed for 30 years. Rhodesia, Southern Africa, the early 1970s. A government fighting a bush war watches its vehicles get torn apart by landmines on dirt roads and comes up with a shape. Instead of a flat floor sitting over the mine, soaking up the whole explosion, they bend the hull into a sharp V, a steel wedge riding high off the ground, angled so a blast underneath hits the slope and gets shoved out to the sides, around the crew, instead of up through the floor. It was not a theory. Crews rode these trucks over mines that would have torn a flat-bottomed vehicle apart, felt the blast throw them sideways, and climbed out and walked away. A generation of soldiers on another continent had already learned the hard way what it took to live through the thing that was now killing Americans. Rhodesia proved the idea in the dirt. Apartheid South Africa turned it into an industry, building a line of these V-hulled trucks, the Hippo, then the Buffalo, then the Caspier, and running them for years across the worst mined ground on Earth. The design worked so well that historians would later call the Caspier the father of the modern mine-resistant truck. The shape was never a secret locked on one continent. Engineers around the world had studied it for decades. Anyone who wanted to know how to keep a crew alive over a landmine could have found the answer in an afternoon in a library. This was not a foreign secret either. By the time roadside bombs were killing Americans, a company in South Carolina was already building V-hulled trucks on exactly this principle. They called it the Cougar. In 2004, in Iraq, Cougars rolled into more than 300 bomb strikes. Not one American riding inside them was killed. Here is the part that should stop you cold. None of this was a discovery. The Pentagon's own investigators found that before the Iraq War even began, The Defense Department already knew that V-hull technology could cut injuries from mines by as much as 70%, while all but eliminating deaths. It was in the files, where Franz Gayl would later find it, in black and white. The answer to the single deadliest weapon of the war had been sitting on a shelf since before most of the men driving those Humvees were born. It usually is. Which brings us to the part of this story that never made the news. Not the truck, the paperwork. Because in 2005, someone inside the Marine Corps did exactly what you would hope. He looked at the dead, looked at the mine-resistant trucks that already existed, and put in a formal, urgent demand to buy them. Then the demand stopped moving. Where it went and how long it sat is the real scandal, and almost nobody ever filmed it. The request had a name and a number, an urgent universal needs statement. In the Marine Corps, that is the flare you fire when troops need something now, not in the next budget cycle, because men are dying without it. On February 17, 2005, a Marine general in Iraq sent one up. It asked for 1,169 mine-resistant vehicles to get his men out of the Humvee on the worst roads in Anbar. It went to a command in Virginia, whose job was to turn requests like that into real programs. There, according to the Pentagon's own Inspector General, the process simply stopped. In August of 2005, that command stopped processing the request. The reason, on the record, was that the Marine Corps had just settled on the up-armored Humvee as the solution it could field immediately. The mine-resistant truck was set aside as too big a leap for right now. Sit with that, because it is the honest center of this whole story. This was not a villain locking armor in a vault. Someone made a call that sounded reasonable in a meeting. The up-armored Humvee was here, now, coming off a line. The mine-resistant truck was heavy, expensive, and unproven at that scale. Choosing the truck you can hand a soldier today over the truck you still have to build looks defensible on a slide. In the field, it meant the request to buy the one vehicle that could survive an explosively formed penetrator sat frozen, while those penetrators kept going off. In the Inspector General's own words, the body that should have weighed that trade was never given the chance to. For a while, nobody on the outside knew any of it. Then, the man I told you to remember started pulling the thread. Franz Gayl. A retired Marine working as a civilian science advisor to the Corps, the kind of man whose whole job is to notice when the machine is failing. He went back through the files, found the buried request, and wrote the whole timeline down in a report that reached the Associated Press in 2008. His charge was specific. The Marines, he wrote, had failed to act on the 2005 request because they wanted to preserve funding for other programs. He laid out the dates, the request, the stop, and the long silence after it, and he put his own name on all of it. Gayl was blunt, and he was careful. He never claimed a body count. He wrote that if the mine-resistant trucks had been bought and fielded in 2005, when the need was already known, hundreds of deaths and injuries could have been prevented. Could have. He held the word conditional, because that is exactly as far as the evidence let him go. Here is the detail that makes it worse, not better. When the Inspector General finished investigating, it found no crime, no corruption, no criminal negligence. Nobody broke a law. The trucks were not delayed by a conspiracy. They were delayed by a system working the way it was built to work. A process that took an urgent plea from a war zone and treated it like any other form in the queue and let it sit. For 19 months, that fix was impossible. Then one man made it the single most important thing in the Department of Defense in an afternoon. Robert Gates took over as Secretary of Defense at the end of 2006. He was reading the reporting on the war, and one number stopped him. A USA Today reporter had done the arithmetic that mattered. Across the roadside bombings of the Marines' handful of mine-resistant trucks in Anbar, almost no one inside had been killed. And the Marines out there, running about 100 of them, were begging for thousands more. Nobody above them had said yes. On May 2, 2007, Gates declared the mine-resistant truck the #1 acquisition priority in the entire Department of Defense. Not one of the top priorities, the top one. Ahead of every jet, every ship, every missile program in the building. Sit with the two halves of that. For 19 months, the request was too hard, too big, too expensive, not ready. The physics never changed. The V-hull worked exactly as it had for 30 years. The factories were the same factories. The only thing that changed was that a man with the authority to move the money decided it was worth moving. What the system had sworn it could not do, the system did, at a scale that is genuinely staggering the moment it chose to. The orders detonated. Cougars, RG-31s, Max Pros, Caymans, Buffaloes. A whole zoo of mine-resistant trucks from half a dozen builders racing toward Iraq as fast as the lines could run. The thing that had been impossible for a year and a half turned out to be a matter of somebody finally saying yes. The trucks delivered, and the difference was measurable. Ride out a bomb in an up-armored Humvee, and a soldier's chance of being killed or hurt ran about 1 in 5. In a mine-resistant truck, it fell to roughly 1 in 16. The Pentagon's own investigators put it another way. A man in one of these trucks was 4 to 5 times more likely to walk away than a man in the Humvee it replaced. That gap is the clearest measure of how good the answer was. It is also the gap that sat behind every one of those 19 months. You would think a man who was right would be thanked. Franz Gayl was not thanked. Once his report went public, the Marine Corps went after the man, not the problem. His security clearance was suspended, then stripped down. He was handed a poor performance review, reassigned, and at one point told to stay away from the building where he worked. The advisor who had documented a deadly delay spent the next several years fighting to keep his job and his name. He had been right about the trucks. Being right inside that building turned out to be the most dangerous thing he could have done. It took until 2014, 7 years of complaints, investigations, and legal fights before the Marine Corps settled with him, and Gayl walked away with his record cleared and protections most whistleblowers never get. He won. It cost him 7 years. Notice what the system moved fast on. It could not find a way to buy a proven truck for 19 months. It found a way to come down on the man who said so almost at once. The same machine that treated an urgent war zone request like routine paperwork treated an inconvenient truth like a threat. Here is where this story has to turn on itself, because the mine-resistant truck was not a miracle. It came with a bill of its own. The very things that let it survive a blast, the height, the weight, the deep steel hull, made it a different kind of dangerous. An MRAP could weigh 3 times what a Humvee weighed. It sat tall, with its mass up high. On a narrow road, on a soft shoulder, on a mountain track, that meant it rolled. Between late 2007 and the middle of 2008, of 66 serious MRAP accidents, around 40 were rollovers. In some of them, the truck went over into a canal and filled with water, and the same steel box that had saved men from bombs trapped them under it. Soldiers who would have walked away from a roadside blast drowned inside the vehicle built to protect them. In one rollover, 3 Green Berets went into a canal in southern Afghanistan and did not come out. Near Baghdad, another crew went over, and 2 men drowned before help could reach them. The weight that stopped a shaped charge also made the truck brutally hard to climb out of upside down, in water, in the dark. The trucks that worked in the flat towns of Iraq were often useless in the mountains of Afghanistan, too heavy for the bridges, too wide for the trails, too slow to chase anyone. The Pentagon had to turn around and build a smaller, lighter version, the MATV, just to fight the next war. This is the part the angriest version of this story leaves out. The delay was real. The buried request was real. The truck at the end of it was not a perfect answer that villains withheld. It was a heavy, imperfect, life-saving compromise that carried its own body count. Both things are true at once. The system was too slow to field it, and the thing it finally fielded was no magic wand. A war does not hand you clean choices. It hands you the least bad one late. The war wound down. The trucks had nowhere to go. By the time the line shut down in October of 2012, the country had built more than 27,000 mine-resistant trucks at a cost of nearly $48 billion. An armored fleet the size of a small nation's, thrown together almost overnight for two wars that were already ending. The Humvee itself finally got replaced, not by another bolt-on kit, but by a whole new vehicle designed from the wheels up to live through a bomb, the Joint Light Tactical Vehicle. The lesson had eventually sunk in. It only took 2 wars and 20 years. The MRAPs went out with less dignity. Some were shredded for scrap. $1-million trucks fed into a chipper because it cost too much to ship them home. Thousands more were handed free to local police through a federal surplus program, which is how a truck built to survive an Iranian-shaped charge ended up parked in small-town America. One went to Dundee, Michigan, a town of about 4,000 people, reportedly to help watch over a sporting goods store. Another went to a county in Minnesota, where it was rolled out for a zombie apocalypse training event. On the federal transfer forms, small departments had to write in why they needed a mine-resistant combat vehicle, to be used for active shooters, for high-risk warrants, counter-drug. The truck built for the roads of Anbar found a second life on the theory that a rural county might one day need to survive a bomb. The vehicle designed to eat the deadliest bomb of the Iraq War now does crowd control at a Cabela's. Go back to the truck at the gate. The aluminum Humvee idling in Kuwait, a bag of sand on the floor, waiting to roll north. The government knew, before the war even started, that a flat-bottomed truck was a death trap. It knew the shape that fixed it was 30 years old. The field asked for that fix by name in a signed request in 2005. The request was set aside in favor of the truck already on the line. It stayed set aside for 19 months while the bombs got smarter and the coffins kept coming home. Then, one signature turned it into the most urgent program in the building, and the trucks that had been impossible appeared by the tens of thousands. None of it was a crime. That is the whole point. No one was charged because no one broke a law. The system did not fail because bad men captured it. It failed because it was built to move at the speed of a budget, and a war moves at the speed of a bomb. A soldier's urgent need and a routine purchase order went into the same slow machine and came out the same slow way. The Army fixed the truck. It never fixed the machine. You have heard this one before on this channel. The armor plates it knew were cracking. The camouflage, it was told, did not hide anyone. The optics it fielded a decade late. Different objects, same shelf. Same signed warning, sitting in an inbox, waiting for someone with the rank to act on it. Same trucks, same shelf, same gap where a faster answer used to be. If this made you want to go deeper, the 2 books that shape this video are linked in the description, and so is The Vault, where I keep the full script, the research, and everything that did not make the final cut. Subscribe for more of these, and the next one is already waiting at the end of the screen.